Back on my way to a regional this time. I wanted to talk about rogue decks and how to make rogue decks good or more playable in a competitive setting. Now, rogue decks have certain advantages and disadvantages. Disadvantages would be that they're usually not consistent, usually rely on 2 to 3 card combos, usually maybe don't have a lot of main deck space for utility, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the needing 2 to 3 cards to combo, because if a deck has a 1 card way to combo, you're able to fit more. The engine was probably smaller, and then therefore you have like 20 cards for non-engine or 15 cards for non-engine. So those are the disadvantages. Another disadvantage will also be like most rogue decks don't really have a game plan per se. Like, let's say they go first, sure, they'll end up with like maybe a disruption or two, but they're not going to be like hard negates, right? Or they're going to end up requiring to play too many bricks, and then it makes that combo less consistent, and then going second it makes it weird, stuff like that. Those are usually the disadvantages to playing a rogue deck. Now, the advantages of playing a rogue deck is, the main advantage is your opponent doesn't know what your cards do, right? So if your opponent doesn't know what your cards do, they won't really know. Switch lanes. There's a truck coming. If they don't know your deck, they more often than not won't interact with your cards the most optimal way, right? They're gonna end up like negating the wrong thing, maybe letting a play go through, saving their hash for something else, etc. Or if they don't know what your deck does, they might just ash the first thing that they see. You know, a lot of people do that and just hope it gets them there, right? So that's a really, really big advantage. So now, how do you make rogue decks good and competitive in the format, in any format? So one is, you have to make sure, first things first, you have to make sure that your rogue deck, like the play that you make, or like what your strategy revolves around, is at the very least, semi-decent against the best decks in the format. There's clear best decks in the format most of the time. Sometimes it's 1 or 2 decks, sometimes it's 3 or 4 decks, right? Your combo, or what you do going second, they needs to be remotely like decent against the best decks. You can't, your deck can't be something that, you know, doesn't set up a big board, doesn't set up a bunch of negates, but then you're playing against a crazy combo deck. Like, you can't do that. So try to find a combo that your deck can do that's like good against the best decks, right? That's semi-decent against the best decks. That's number 1. 2, you have to make sure with your utility cards that you don't play utility cards that are specific for a certain matchup, right? So this is kind of like counterintuitive to what I was saying right before, but let's say Infernoble is the best deck in the format, right? The combo deck, whatever. And Droll might be really good against that deck. It's incorrect to main deck Droll. Well, the reason why it's incorrect is, sure, if you go against a bunch of Infernoble players, you know, that can be good, but the hardest part of a rogue deck is getting through the early rounds of a tournament. And if you're main decking a card like Droll, and you don't end up playing against a deck that Droll hits, which most likely you won't, because it's the early rounds of a tournament, and we're saying that Infernoble is the best deck, you might play like 1 or 2, maybe, but you need to win your first like 4 or 5 rounds to make sure you start playing against like the best decks all the time. So I say main deck more generic cards. Try to main deck cards like Ash Blossom, maybe, I don't know, Cosmic Cyclone, Veiler, stuff like that. Maybe even Dark Hole, etc. Next is make sure you have alternative win conditions. I mean, I preach about this. Like, I've said this in like so many of my videos, but it's too important. It's so important. You have to make sure, even in a competitive deck, even if you're playing like the best deck of the format, I still think you need to have alternative win conditions. But especially if you're playing rogue, more often than not, you could probably play rivalry or Gozen, usually, or both sometimes, right? Let's say you're playing Marincess, right? You can play rivalry and Gozen. So in every format, there's going to be a floodgate that's good. It's just how the game is, you know, how it's always been. Either rivalry is going to be really good, either Gozen is going to be really good, or Teekaboo is going to be really, really good. So see what floodgate your deck can play, and play that floodgate. Play it at 3.
Reported ahead.
Play it at 3, right? Then maybe you can play Shifter. If you can play Shifter, that's a very good rogue deck. You're probably playing a very good rogue deck. Except if it's Fluttery, so that's a different story. So yeah, play alternative win conditions. Then after that is you have to make sure that you don't play too many bricks. So this is a big thing when it comes to rogue. Usually they need like, not bricks, but they probably need 1 to 3 engine cards, right? Like engine requirements, I would call them, not necessarily bricks. Playing 1 suboptimal card to draw is usually like the cusp. Like you shouldn't want to play more than 1. Now rogue decks kind of bump it up to 3. So if that's the case, try to play more cards in your main deck. So instead of playing 40, that people just think it's correct, play more. Play 44. Even just more than 40. More than 42, I would say, right? Play 43. This way you kind of dilute those cards into the deck and you won't draw them as often. I think that's pretty useful because that's going to be the downfall of your tournament. And if you're playing many rounds in a tournament, you will see, if you're playing 3 cards in your deck that you don't want to see ideally in your opening hand, trust me, you will see those cards a good amount of the time. And you're going to be like, damn, I drew 2 of the cards I can't play with. Yeah, well, you're giving yourself the % chance of seeing it, right? So dilute the deck, play maybe more than 40, 41 cards. I mean, the fact that you're already playing a rogue deck kind of signals that you're not playing the best deck in the room. So you need to have like more things go right for you, right? You need to like draw well. You need to win maybe a few dice rolls more, or you need to play your A game, which is another kind of like the downfall of rogue decks. Not the downfall, but like one thing that makes them hard to play. Hard to compete in a competitive setting. Furthermore, I think just focusing on those things, especially playing alternative win conditions, lowering your bricks, even if it lowers your ceiling a little bit, even if it makes your combo not as crazy, right? Let's say you're playing 2 semi-optimal cards, and then, you know, oh yeah, you can play that 3rd card, and it'll make your combo that much crazier and whatever. Don't do it. Like, I promise you, don't do it. It sounds good. It sounds like, oh, if I open this and this, and I don't draw this and this and this, I'm gonna end on this crazy board and I'm gonna win. That probably will happen, but it's only gonna happen once out of every 5 rounds. Like, that's not consistent. That's not a good thing. It's better to just lower your ceiling, make the combo not as crazy, but also reduce a brick. In the long run, it's gonna give you way more wins. So those are a few tips on how to make rogue decks good. I personally love rogue decks. I try throughout my whole Yu-Gi-Oh career. I've mainly played rogue decks. I love how they're usually extremely unique. I like how when my opponent doesn't really know what my cards do, I like the surprise factor. And like, personally, it's kind of like the nerd rogue player inside of me. I like winning with a strategy that's not competitively viable, right? And I think it also says a lot about the player if you could take a rogue deck and like carry it all the way to the finish line. I think that's amazing. I think it's like very pleasurable. So that's it for this video. I'm on my way to my regional right now, so I'll probably make a video of on my way back home.